Hello, welcome to BGP Masterclass. Today lab is BGP Cluster List. BGP Cluster List, when we are using route reflector in BGP, that time cluster list very useful, and route reflector only create the cluster. Okay, so let's go the theory part. After that we go for to the lab. What is BGP cluster list attribute? Cluster list is one attribute. Okay, so what is cluster list attribute means? For example, for IBGP required full mesh within an autonomous system for functional correctly. Split horizon rule also required for the loop prevention. When you are configure route reflector, when you configure route reflector, we need full mesh, okay, for peering. So we are bypassing when configure route reflector. We are bypassing the full mesh and split horizon. Okay, so when configure route reflector, we need the loop prevention mechanism. So that is the cluster list. Okay, cluster list means it's like originator-ID. Cluster list is BGP attribute. Okay, cluster list attribute only use route reflector. Cluster list is the attribute, but it not used for the best path selection algorithm. Okay, cluster list the attribute that attribute is not used for the best path selection. Okay, cluster list information within the BGP update send for IBGP routers. Okay, and cluster list generate only a route reflector. By default, router as a route reflector router ID is a cluster ID. Cluster ID is how many we configure in our topology route reflector, that much that much cluster, how much configure we are cluster. So that much cluster list is, say for example here configure 1 2 3 4. Okay, four cluster. So here this is the route reflector, this is the route reflector. We will go for the lab and next so this is the R1 is the route reflector for R2, for R3, and for R2, like that. The how much route reflector is that much cluster we can see. One rule is there. All route reflector within a should be full mesh. Okay, each other. How many here if you see here, we have three route reflector here. All are should be full mesh. Okay, that is the requirement. Okay, that is the requirement. All route reflectors should be full mesh within the BGP to avoid this is the rule to configure the route reflector. All route reflectors should be full mesh. Understanding BGP cluster list. Okay, BGP cluster list attribute is a non-transitive attribute. Non-transitive means BGP attribute that can be used internally within the autonomous system. Okay, but that cannot be advertised to outside of the autonomous system. It used only inside the autonomous system. So it not used for the outside of the autonomous system. That is called the non-transitive attribute. Okay, so cluster list is the attribute is the non-transitive attribute. When you see the update for cluster list, the list of cluster IDs route passing through. For example, if you see here, for example, if I this is the client, and R6 is the client, and R4 is the client. For example, so IP BGP for this 4 network means we see this is the cluster. Okay, this is the cluster R2 and R3 also cluster. So we see all the cluster ID in the route path here, saying that list of cluster ID route the to the passing through. it cluster list is the use only cluster list use only route reflector. For example here, if you see this R6 and R4, these are client no, R5 is client no, so they are not using cluster list. Okay, only cluster list using the route reflector only to prevent loop. When means a route reflector advertise a route to other route reflector. A route reflector put its own cluster ID in the cluster list. I am saying no here. Means if you means if you go to the when this advertise anyone, he's put in the own cluster list in the route. Okay, here route reflector put own cluster list cluster list. Attribute. If you see show IP BGP then 3.3.3, so it will be see the how much cluster list is there. So all the route reflector put on own cluster list in the path. Okay, when route reflector receive update from the other route reflector, okay, other route reflector, it see cluster list. In that cluster list see the cluster ID. Okay, if own cluster ID not in the cluster list, then take that update and process. Okay, and add own cluster ID in the cluster list and send to root. Okay, and add own cluster ID ID in the cluster list. Okay, add in the cluster list and send to the other route reflector. In other route reflector receive the BGP update and read. If she own cluster ID in the cluster list, then there is a discard the route. Okay, for loop prevention. Okay, so again I will be discuss these things. See, this is the main purpose of the configure the this is the loop prevention, because if any route reflector receive in update in that update, if see a route reflector in the cluster list if have own cluster ID, so it will be discard the route. If own cluster ID is not available in cluster list, it will be the receive and send to other route reflector, and send other route reflector and send okay, it's sent to other route reflector. Send other route reflector, and this if route reflector can be send other route reflector and client and non-client and eBGP never. Okay, one rule is there. BGP route reflector send update with cluster list. Means for example, if you are configure here cluster, for example, this is I am talking about this cluster. Only route reflector only send the update. Okay, client cannot send the update. Okay, client there is a different scenario. For if only route reflector send the update. In that update only it send the cluster list. Okay, so route reflector only send the cluster list. Okay, so here saying only route reflector send BGP update with cluster list. When route reflector send BGP update to neighbors, it send the cluster list. Okay, so when route reflector send BGP update to the client, non-client and other route reflector. Okay, means here BGP this is the for example, this is the scenario. This is the route reflector, and it's connected to the other route reflector, and here connected to the non-client. Okay, non-client. So here client is there. So when route reflector send to client and other route reflector or non-client, when send the this update to others. So BGP means that time he's sending the cluster list. Okay, cluster list. Those that time this is the and eBGP never send the cluster list, because this is the transitive. Okay, non-transitive. This is the non-transitive attribute. Okay, so here when route reflector send BGP update to client, non-client and other route reflector, those update only available cluster list attribute. Okay, Here one point is there. The question is client non-client client and non-client why receive cluster list attribute. Here question is a client or non-client router why receive cluster list attribute. The only root reflector check cluster list. It's a own cluster ID in the cluster list. Means for example, the cluster list actually used for the loop prevention If root reflector see the cluster in the cluster list own cluster ID, so it will be discard that root. Okay, so the question is why client and non-client also receive that update, because we are saying no here that a root reflector send BGP update with the client and non-client and other route reflector with BGP update with the cluster list. So the question is why client and non-client also receive this update, because this is used for only route reflector. No, route reflector receive means it's own cluster ID in the cluster list, means it discard that route. So here client and non-client router not check the cluster ID. Okay, client and non-client router not check the cluster list, and client and non-client never use cluster list to validate what to do the this new route. Okay, so their client and non-client that not use also, because that only route reflector only that route that cluster list use. So client and non-client also they are not taking any decision also for that route. Okay, so why they are receiving? Because why client and non-client receive the cluster list update in the BGP update. Because when we create route reflector topology, it possible one router can client for one route reflector and one route reflector for itself for other client. For example, here one router is there. Okay, so this is for example router 1. So here configure. So here router 2. So router 1 is the route reflector for the his client R2. But if you configure here, maybe this is the client, this is the route reflector. Okay, so okay, this is the client, this is the route reflector. Okay, so here this router is route reflector for R2, and this R1 client for R3. This is R3. So R3 is the route reflector and client is your R1, and R1 is the route reflector and client is the R2. Okay, so R1 is the route reflector for R2, but client for R3. Okay, for R3 route reflector is R3 client is the R1. So here that only saying here. And why need cluster list update information receive client and non-client routers? Because when we create a route reflector topology, it possible to make a route reflector client for one route reflector and route reflector itself for other client. Okay, it's called the hierarchical route reflector designing. If you see the in how to what is the hierarchical route reflector design, it is the it is the concept of, for example, if we have a very big topology in big service provider, big topology. So in that big topology we thousands of router is there. So in there this is not possible to configure the full mesh. So in that full mesh we configure the multiple route reflector. Okay, so in that is called multiple. When configure the multiple route reflector, that is called the hierarchical route reflector designing. Okay, so this is the theory part. For the maybe this lab is little bit length. So this is the theory part. Everything I explained. Now we are going to the Now we are going to the lab. So again, I will be theory. I will be briefly what I will be read everything. What is BGP cluster list attribute? BGP require full mesh to within the OS to function correctly. Okay, so the BGP split horizon rule also required to loop prevention for the loop prevention. Okay, when we configure the route reflector, we bypass full mesh and all as well as split horizon. Okay, so that for route reflector one required one loop prevention mechanism, that is the cluster list. Okay, cluster list is like originator-ID. Okay, so cluster list is the BGP attribute, and cluster list attribute only use the route reflector. Okay, then cluster list BGP attribute, but is not used for the best path selection algorithm. Cluster list information within the BGP update and sent to the IBGP routers. Cluster list generate only route reflector. Okay. How many route reflector configure, that much cluster list we see the cluster ID see the we see. Okay, cluster list nothing but by default cluster list is the by default cluster list is the router ID of the cluster. Okay, of the route reflector. Okay. Route reflector router ID is the by default cluster ID. And another thing is, if you give the forcefully command in BGP in BGP cluster ID for example, one router 3 has cluster router ID 3.3.3.3. Okay, if you are giving already we hard code router ID 3.3.3.3, so by default is taking the cluster ID is the 3.3.3. If you are hard code again in that router BGP cluster list 100.100.100.100, so it will be take the cluster list as a 100.100.100.100. so we will be see the in the lab that also. Okay, so after that in the rule is a route reflector within an autonomous system full mesh pairing each other, means how many we have you have a route reflector that all the route reflectors should be all the RR should be full mesh. Okay, full mesh. And here saying to understanding more about a cluster list is a non-transitive attribute, means it used only for the internal BGP, it not used for the external BGP. That is a non-transitive attribute. Okay, and that list the list cluster list bypass the cluster list has a route the passing through, means how many cluster is there that when see the update that all the how many, for example here for example here one RR is there. Okay, RR is there and your destination is there. Here your destination source is there, so your traffic will going there. So if you see for this route all this you will see this cluster ID and this cluster ID in that route also. Okay, so it in cluster ID that list cluster ID in a route has passed through. Okay, it use it is used for the route reflector identify the loop and prevention them. Okay, it identified the loop and in prevention them. Okay, and means the route reflector advertise the other route reflector put own cluster ID in the cluster list. Okay, when route reflector update from the other route reflector, it see cluster list. In that cluster list see the cluster ID. Okay, if see own ID is not in cluster list, then take that update and process and add the own cluster ID in the cluster list and send to other route reflector. In other route reflector receive the BGP update and send other route reflector receive BGP update and read if she own cluster ID in the cluster list, then there is a discard that route. Okay, if she own if route reflector receive the own cluster ID in the cluster list, so it discard the route. The rule is here only route reflector send BGP update with cluster list. Okay, and when the route reflector send the BGP update to others means others client, non-client, and other route reflector, it add cluster list. Okay, it add only BGP only. So those available in cluster list means only route reflector when send the update, it use the cluster list only. Okay, it add and with when route reflector send update, see it add a cluster list also in that update. Okay, only route reflector. So the question is non-client client and non-client router why receive cluster list? Because they are not do anything of that route. No, they don't take any own decision with that cluster ID. No. The route reflector check because route reflector check cluster list and only route reflector check the cluster list and see the own decision of the cluster list the cluster ID. Okay, so here client and non-client router not check the cluster ID. Okay, so and client and non-client never use cluster list and validate that to do this route. Okay, so why need a cluster list update information received client and non-client router? Because when we create route reflector topology, it possible a router client for one route reflector and route reflector itself for other client. Okay, this is called hierarchical route reflector designing. Now we go for the lab part. We will as soon as possible finish this lab. Okay, this is the lab. We did for this is the route reflector. This lab is BGP cluster list. Okay, BGP cluster list. So this is the route. This is autonomous one, means all the router within the AS. Okay, this is the R1 is the route reflector, R3 is the route reflector, and R2 is the route reflector. Okay, so the R3 is the route reflector for the R4 and R5, and R2 is the route reflector for the R6 only, and R1 is the route reflector for the R7, and R7 also route reflector for the R8. Means R7 is client for the R1, but route reflector for the R8. Okay, R7. Okay, so this is the lab. Will be how to do this lab will be explained a little bit. So by default the configuration part, by default all the router we configure like normal only. For R1 we do R3 is the never, and R2 is the never, and R7 is the never. Like that R3 also R1 never, R2 never, all are never, and R2 also these two never, and here never, and everything like R7 also like this never, all are never, basic configuration. And another thing is we make a client command R3 as the R4 client, route reflector client, and route reflector only one single command only to make the route reflector. So only we give the 4 is the route reflector client and 5 is the route reflector client. In R2 we give the R6 is the route reflector client, and R1 we give the R7 is the route reflector client, and R7 we give the R8 is the root reflector client. Okay. After that we do the some test also. So what test do we do? We see, for example, here we change the by default is take the all the root reflector router ID is the cluster ID. Okay. When you see the path see the path, so it will be the by default take the by default take the router ID as the cluster ID. We need to change here cluster ID also. So how to that cluster ID will be changed, and we are not changing the router ID. We change the only cluster ID. Okay. So and then another will also check. We change how to loop prevention when in the cluster list router receive a update from other cluster ID. So it will be how to ignore. So for that we also do some test here. Okay. So so let's start the configuration part. I have done some configuration here. So I will be show here configuration part. It will be very easy for everyone. So this attribute, this is the BGP cluster list lab. Okay, this is the R1 configuration. R1 configuration. Okay, R1 configuration, what saying, we create the one loopback. Okay, loopback 1111 because we check the connectivity. Okay, after that we configure the BGP and advertise the hard code the router ID. Router ID is the 1.1.1.1. Okay, as per router name we are giving the loopback IP address and the router ID. Okay, then we make three neighbor means R3 neighbor, R2 neighbor, and R7 neighbor, and advertise the network loopback also. Okay, advertise the loopback because other router to access that loopback, and add the network command because the reachability issue, we give the all the network command. Okay, so router should know, every router should have every update. Okay, then here configure the 7 is the root reflector client. For R1 is the 7 is the router. This is the only single command. Okay. Okay, so this will be do later, no problem. After that in R2 like that we configure the loopback, configure and hardcode the router ID, and R2 neighbor 3 neighbor, R2 neighbor 1 3 and 6, 1 3 and 6, and advertise the loopback and direct connector network. Okay, and R2 also 6 is the route reflector client in MED. Okay, and R3 also configuration, same configuration only. Configure the loopback, advertise loopback and hardcode the router ID is the 3.3.3, and make neighbor 4 neighbor because R3 have 4 neighbor, 4 5 and 1 2. Okay, 4 neighbor. Then we advertise loopback and direct connected network. Okay, after that 4 and 5, for this 4 and 5 is the route reflector client. Like that R4 also configure same thing. R4 also advertise loopback and router ID is hardcode, and the 3 is the neighbor. Okay, 3 is the neighbor, and advertise loopback and advertise direct connected network. Okay, R5 also same thing like R4 advertise configure loopback, advertise hardcode the loopback router ID, and make and 3 is a neighbor, and advertise loopback and direct connected advertise. Okay, and R6 also same like R5 only. R5 only, so configure the loopback and hardcode the router ID, and neighbor is R6 neighbor is the R2. Okay, R2, then advertise loopback and direct connected network advertise. Okay, R7 also same thing. R7 is R7 this router. So hardcode loopback IP. Okay, hardcode router ID. then one is the never, one is the never, and 8 is the never, and advertise loopback, and 7 direct connected advertise, and 7 this R8 is the route reflector client in R for R7. Okay, then R8 also less configuration only, advertise, configure the loopback and hardcode the router ID, and never is the R7 is the never, and is advertise loopback, and advertise direct connected. Okay, so let's configure all the steps. So I in the in this configuration part, I'm not means I configure only the interface, direct interface IP. Will show here. So IP. So IP interface brief, if see the only direct connected interface IP, so run session BGP. So I'm not configure any of the router BGP session. So let's start configuration one by one router. Okay, so this is the already we discussed what configuration is there in this configuration. So copy and paste. Okay, we'll do this configuration. Okay, we'll later do this part. Okay, copy. So R1 configuration. Okay, already we configuration discussed everything, and R2 configuration. Okay, for R3 configuration. Okay, for R4 configuration. R5. R6. R7. And R8. Okay, all the configuration part done here. So let's start the output from the everywhere. Okay, so we'll go. So IPPJ, see in R1 already 1 2 3 neighbors are off. Okay, R2 also three neighbors are off. R3 also, R3 has 4 neighbor, right? R3 has 4 5 and 4 neighbor, 3 neighbor off. Okay, R4 is not coming up. So here, see R3 has 3 neighbor, right? R3 has 1 2 and 4 5. Okay, 1 2 4 5. So 4 is not R3. 4 is not come up. Okay, go 4. So IP BGP summary. Okay, so never showing ideal. See, if never showing ideal, first you need to check the never is reachable or not. Okay, never is not reachable. Okay, this is the step to do why not never reachable. So never reachable, never is not reachable. So check the IP configuration. So IP interface brief. Okay, so already interface IP is configured. Go to the R3 configuration. So IP interface brief. R3 is the not configure, the three never only configure. Okay, this maybe this will be by mistakenly not configure S1 by 0. Okay, and S1/0. Okay, this is the not configure. Okay, so we'll do the configuration very fast. Okay, standard 0 dot So here configuration now, so IP BGP starter, so IP BGP summary. Okay, BGP come up now, BGP. Okay, that interface. So this is also another troubleshoot. If you see in if you are any never not come means if you see never status is showing the ideal state. So you should ping the never IP is reachable or not. Okay, after that we'll troubleshoot here also. Now if you are see show IP BGP. Okay, never reach out. So this is the done. All the neighbors are come up. Neighbors are come up. If you see the R, all are see R7 also see. R7 also two neighbors come up. R8 also one come. R6 also R6 also R2 come. Okay, R5 also R3 coming. R4 done, R3 done, R2 done, R1 done. Okay, so everything will update coming. So now start the check the output and everything. So we configure the route reflector client also. Okay, for just for R1 R7 is the client, for R2 R6 is the client, for R3 R4 and R5 is the client, and R7 R8 is the client. Okay, so now will be see the BGP update and BGP update. Okay, so if you come here, you come to R6 means this R6 is OIP BGP. So IP BGP. See the every update. Okay, every update. See BGP in IBGP rule. Is for two prevention. One, if receive a update from the one IBGP neighbor, is not sent to the other IBGP neighbor. Okay, so but in this we configure the route reflector so that we can ping 8.8 also, because if you see R6 R8 is the not directly connected. Also we are reachable because of the route reflector. Okay, because of the route reflector we are reaching the all the network in the IBGP network. Okay, so here we bypass the full mesh and split horizon rule. Okay, and and we are able to, because of route reflector, we are able to reach every network. For every network we are able to reach within the route reflector. So now come to the cluster part. If you see so IP BGP 8.8 network. So IP BGP 8.8.8 network. So if you see here, cluster list also here showing. Okay, BGP originator ID 8.8.8. Originator ID means this is the route reflector. Sorry, this is the network where means where we are asking now. So IP BGP 8.8. So 8 originator ID is 8.8, and cluster list, if you see, this is the main part, cluster list. So cluster list you see 2.2.2.2. Okay, this R2 is the 2.2.2. Then R1 is the 100.100.1. Sorry, 1.1.1. After that 7.7.7. This is the cluster list. Okay, this now we go for to the cluster. For example, if you see R1 update here, so run session BGP. Okay, so we just hardcode the router ID. We are not hardcode the cluster ID. If you hardcode the cluster ID also, see, if you see here, if you in R6 if you see in R6 so IP BGP, it is showing the R2 R1 R7. Okay, R1 cluster ID is the 1.1 by default is take the router ID. So if you change the cluster ID, okay, BGP cluster ID 100.100.100.100. Okay, so we are one thing, 100 IP we are not configure anymore. Not configure in our router. Okay, this router R1 router, there is a not configure any 100 dot. By default we are giving the anything. Okay, now we will clear the BGP session, because if clear the BGP session, we will get the correct output. Okay, so in that time it will be take little bit time. R2 also we need to if possible to clear this. Okay, everything clear. Now you see the output for everyone. If you see R5 also, R4 and 5, they also reachable everything. R4 5 update also we'll see. So IP BGP. Okay, now due to we clear the BGP session, it take little bit time to load the everything. Okay, because we are not receiving an R1 update, R1 update, R6 update, R8 update. So wait some time. It will little bit time. So I'll be on that time I'll be show all the routers configuration. So run session BGP, what configuration we done in BGP side. Okay, this is the R1 configuration. This is the R2 configuration. This is the R3 configuration. R4 configuration. R5 configuration, R6 configuration, R7 configuration, and R8 configuration. Okay, so IP BGP. See, now updates come. Still that 8.8 update not coming. Wait, it will taking little bit time. It update now coming. Okay, see, so if you see all the if you see in BGP, if you see ping 8.8.8.8. okay, so IP BGP, so IP BGP 8.8.8.8. So IP BGP 8.8. See, if you see, it will be going via R3. I mean R4. Okay, this and I mean R4. Now traffic going like this. Okay, so R3 is the route reflector, and R1 change. Just now we changed the route reflector. Then R7. After that is, if you see here R1, we are router ID also there and cluster ID also there. If you are not configured the cluster ID, it will take by default the router ID. Okay, if you see previously also, so IP BGP, so IP BGP 8.8.8.8. you see that previously it's coming the 1.1, now will coming the 7.100.100.100.100. okay, due to that in BGP rule is one IBGP update is not sent to the other IBGP update because of route reflector we are configure. So in that route reflector, for that route reflector we'll get the all the update. If in R6 also we ping every network 4.4.4.4 is reachable, and R7 also reachable, 7.7.7. also reachable. Okay, every now if you see the so IP BGP, every network we can the we will reach the every network. Okay, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. okay, all are reaching. Now we done the one step in R1 we change the cluster ID. Another step will change the for the how to one more thing will be the cross check also. So how to stop the for root prevention, how to stop the how to ignore if root reflector if root reflector see the own cluster ID in the cluster list, is ignore the path. Okay, that also we will be see. Okay, for example, in you go to the you go to the R6, go to the R6 and show IP BGP. Okay, show IP show IP BGP, show IP BGP 8.8.8.8. Okay, so IP BGP 8.8, it's showing this is the part. Okay, we'll do the and here also R4 R5 also we do the same thing only, because we do something here. Okay, okay, so we get the R6 R4C, this is the for 8 network we receive the, this is the cluster list, and R6 also see, this is the cluster list. Now we what we do now, this is the for the cross checking. So look how to it if your root reflector see the own cluster list, cluster ID in the cluster list, it ignore or not. So that we do one something here. So we by default R7 has the cluster ID is the 7.7.7.7. Okay, so we will be hard code cluster ID is the ID is the cluster ID is the 3.3.3.3. Okay, 3.3.3. So 3.3.3. So now see this four, if you what will we do? So when we try to access the 8 networks, so R8 will be ignore that, because R8 will be receive own cluster ID in the cluster list. So R4 and R5 and R3 will be not get update of the R8. Okay, R8, because see for this part will be not received. Okay, so let's try do the this lab also. Okay, so now we'll be go to the R7. Okay, if you see R7 cluster, this is the cluster ID. Okay, this cluster ID will be changed. Okay, so I go to the R7, config T, router BGP cluster ID. Now we change the cluster ID is the 3.3.3.3. Okay, let's discuss. We clear the BGP session because it will be get the, it take little time. Clear the BGP. R3 also we clear. It take a little time, but we get the proper update. Okay, so we what we did now. Now we did we changed the cluster ID is 3.3.3. Okay, now we change cluster ID is 3.3. This router cluster ID also 3.3. This cluster ID also 3.3. Okay, so we will be see this see this for this cluster update, R8 update, R3 receive or not. Now this is the part means a cluster. If a router, if a root reflector receive own cluster list in the cluster cluster ID in the own router, if router receive own cluster ID in the cluster list, it ignore. Okay, so we see the output of this. Okay, so we did this we do the hard code of the 3.3.3. Okay, here. So now see the output. We first we see the R6. Okay, this out. So IP BGP, again same command will be run. So IP BGP, it's not reachable. So it should reachable because this is no problem. It will take little bit time. So IP BGP it take little while because there is a no we are change only 3.3 no here only 3 dots. So IP BGP, so IP BGP, so IP BGP. Okay, sorry. So IP BGP. Sorry. So run session BGP. Okay. We change cluster ID here 3.3. So there is a no problem for R1 R2, right? Because it's traffic coming through this one. Only R3 problem. So R6 should be reach the should get the update of the R8. See, no, R8 update it will be received, and if you ping also R8 will be ping. Okay, ping 8.8.8.8. It is ping and so IP BGP 8.8.8.8. Okay, so if you see we change R7 previously this is the 7.7.7. now it is received the 3.3.3. okay, if you from R6 to reach try to access R8, so this is the R2. okay, after that 100. okay, 100, then after that 3.3 because we have received the 3.3. see, so here we received the R8 update. Now we see the update now also R1 also receive because R1 R6 means R1 also receive. okay, so IP BGP, so R1 also 8 update receive, R2 also 8 update receive. okay, so IP BGP. okay, R2 also receive this one, and if you see R3 here, if you see R3 here not receives because of that in that router C in the cluster list attribute. okay, cluster list attribute, it see the own cluster ID in that cluster list. okay, so it ignore that 8.8. if you see 1 receive, 2 receive, 6 receives, all are received. But if this router receive, this router receive, this router receive, all are received the 8 update, but R3 not receive. R4, if you see R4 and R4 and R5 also you will not see. So IP BGP. okay, here also you are not able to see because R3 not receive. no, R4 5 it will not on. So also not receive. okay, because R3 no, route reflector no here. So IP BGP. okay, so IP BGP 7 dot, because of that loop prevention that this router see own cluster ID in that cluster list, so it will be not receive. If you see R6 receive. okay, R6 receive update for this is the update. So this is the lab we do this lab for the cluster list. This is the very important lab in because route reflector is the very big concept in BGP, a big role in the BGP. So how to do this lab, what is the concept? Maybe this lab is the very little bit length, but very useful knowledge for this lab. So thank you for watching. If you have any doubt, any doubt, please comment us. So I will be update on that comment. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe our BGP Masterclass channel so that we will be get motivate and do some extra video. Thank you for watching.